I'm Thierry Heles. This is The Next Leap. Is AI about to steal your job? Today we're tackling the messy, complicated reality of generative AI and asking a simple question. Is it actually creating anything worthwhile? Sue Turner, OBE, and Richard Cole from the University of Bristol, Ben Ackland from Meaning Machine, and Megan Butler from KPMG aren't here to wax poetic about robots. They are staring down a terrifying trend. AI is being shoved into everything, often without the right frameworks in place. The result? A tidal wave of low-quality slop and a dangerous lack of oversight. Cole, for example, argues that AI is a recompilation engine, although he does have concrete examples of AI uses that deliver something new, with significant human input. So this isn't about fear-mongering, it's about asking who controls the tools and how do we stop AI from turning our creative industries into a bland echo chamber. I'm very happy to be bringing you this panel conversation, which is a recording of our most recent Foresight Live event at the University of Bristol. Our next event on the 6th of May will tackle AI cybersecurity double-edged sword. There's a link in the show notes to grab your free ticket, so do that and join us for what will be another thought-provoking conversation. I'm going to ask the panel to very quickly introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Ben Ackland. I'm from Meaning Machine. We're a game and tech startup studio in Bristol, and we are empowering authors to use AI characters and quests in their creative experiences.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Richard Cole. I'm a senior lecturer in digital futures here at the University of Bristol. I also co-direct the Bristol Digital Game Lab.
Perfect. Hi everyone, I'm Megan Butler. I'm the UK AI workforce lead at KPMG. The only other interesting thing about me is that I also work on my PhD. I'm writing my thesis now on the adoption of AI. So if you're ever interested in a conversation about AI, that's pretty much my entire life at the moment.
Sounds good to me, Megan. My name's Sue Turner. I'm Professor in Practice for AI and Digital Tech at the University of Bristol Business School. So that's 2 days a week. The rest of my life is very much AI as well. I run a company called AI Governance, and we help organizations and leaders and aspiring leaders figure out how to use AI with wisdom and integrity.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Might stay on you then, Sue. What do we mean when we talk about creativity in the context of AI?
I think wind back 2 years, 3 years, and most people would say to me, oh, AI can't be creative. Machines can't be creative. That is something that is inherently human and will always be. But I think if you look at Einstein's definition of creativity, he said creativity is about seeing what everyone sees and then doing things that no one has ever thought of. And look at some of our image generation tools now compared to 2 or 3 years ago. They do see what everyone sees because they're trained on all the works that are out there. And they create some really weird images that you might challenge and say, actually, nobody human would create those images. So perhaps under that definition, we can say that AI can in itself be creative. So for me, it's not so much about are machines creative? I think they can be under that definition, but who owns that creativity and how do we think of it? How do we value the creativity that machines can produce versus the creativity that humans can produce? When I think about human works, I think about things like I'm wearing a necklace tonight, which has got a teeny little piece of Murano glass on it from Venice. And, Murano glass, this incredible handcrafted, very expensive. If you want to buy a whole chandelier, I can just about afford a teeny little piece. But if you compare that to glass made in a factory, which is, again, machine made, it has a different quality to it. It can be mass produced. It can be very cheap. So we're getting this dilemma of creativity, which we want to value and we want to say has a particular resonance with us as human beings. But at the same time, there's all this slop, this cheap stuff that's out there that we don't want to use this same word for. So for me, in a nutshell, it comes down to different words and how we talk about the creative process and who are creators. For me, I would never use the word author when I'm talking about an AI. I think authors are humans. I think artists are humans. I think musicians are humans. So yes, a machine can produce works that are musical, but I would never call it a musician.
Yeah, that makes sense. You very neatly managed to touch on a few points there that we are going to pick up on. But I might ask Megan's view as well on this from a consultant's point of view.
That's a really great question because coming from the business world, creativity can sometimes come across a bit almost like a dirty word, where we think of it as being artists mostly. But I argue creativity is going to become one of the most valuable resources that we have in the future, especially in a world of AI. And the World Economic Forum agrees with me. They say it's one of the top 4. And the head engineer of a product that we work with agrees with me with creativity. And my argument is that if we think about creativity, in the UK, we've almost done ourselves a little bit of a disservice because the government has actually labeled the creative industries and defined what's in it. And it's very much kind of the more traditional things that we think of creativity as an artist. Where in reality, if we think about it, scientists, when they're setting up their experiments, it requires a ton of creativity. And in the consulting world, right now, we're massively being impacted by AI. Not only is the work we're doing being impacted, but our clients are being impacted massively. And where we're seeing the most amount of impact is in work and how work gets done traditionally in organizations. And it's going to take a ton of creativity. And again, I agree with you. The creativity comes from the people. That is going to take a ton of creativity for us to think about how do we redesign processes? How do we redesign organization and how work gets done? And so I think we need to start thinking about creativity in the much broader range. It was really cool. Quite a few years ago, we had a conference that we did in London, a huge conference. 2018 was the first one. And we had several people come in. There was one section of the conference floor where it was looking at AI in the arts. It was really interesting. There was one photo that AI created that really touched me. And I have a photo of it hidden away in one of my digital hoards back home. And the interesting thing was I agree with you. It was really neat because the system was creative, but it was creative based off of a bunch of human work that it redesigned, which is part of the innovation process. But will it come up with something new and unique, something outside of our realm? I question that, but I think when we talk about creativity with AI, we need to broaden our understanding of what we mean by creativity and understand that's going to take creativity from a business perspective, from a scientific lens, from the creative industries as well, to think about that as we move forward into a world of AI.
Yeah, Richard, I don't want to preempt your answer, but please tell us about your work that you've done with the Egyptian exhibit as well, because I think that is a really good example of creativity in AI.
Of course, very happy to talk about that. I'd like to pick up though on what Megan was just saying, Sue, as well, because I think a bit of a historical perspective, I'm a historian by training, I've moved into the digital space, so I carry historical perspective through, is really valuable here because we've continuously gone through from antiquity to today different moments where we've redefined what creativity means, what authorship means, often in a literal legal sense, where we've pulled down and said, okay, an author is an owner of this IP for this particular work. Go back to antiquity, authorship was diverse, it was distributed, it was an oral storytelling culture. And then when everything gets formalized in a kind of written form, then authorship means something different. And then if you take us forward to sort of more recent times, different areas of media creation have defined creativity and protected that creativity in very different ways. So you get sort of jazz is about continuously adopting previous forms and working with them and moving within that context in the purpose of creating something new, though. And then if we move to AI, I think it is at its core a recompilation engine of what we have already done. So by that definition, I don't think it can do anything new and it can't necessarily push forward. What it does actually is kind of the low level or kind of quite soft creativity, I guess you could define it, whereby as human authors, we've always dipped in and out of and recompiled other people's work. That is how we move forward. That doesn't actually, I think, necessarily speak to the Einstein idea of moving ideas forward, which I think is perhaps where AI, if it remains at its core of kind of recompilation of what exists, is it ever going to do that? Again, I think, Megan, you're right, I'm doubtful. It's not to say that I think humans have something inherent, because I think we have done what AI has done throughout our culture, but we've not been able to do it at that kind of same kind of scale. That's what seems sort of magical about it. So yeah, historical perspective is helpful. I'll talk about culture quest, I think, in a bit, because I think there's other questions that are relevant. I'd like to hear Ben's thoughts.
Well, I guess, are we talking about AI being creative, or are we talking about humans being creative with AI? From our perspective, it's more of the latter. I think reflecting over maybe the last century or so, creativity kind of started, in particular writing, started with creating content and putting that content out there. And that was tended to be linear content that was consumed, books, then films, etc. And in the last 30 years or so, we've seen the consumer be part of that creativity. So with social media, with commenting, with emergent worlds, with being able to choose your path of your own adventure, etc. For us, AI is just the sort of third piece of the puzzle to that creativity journey and part of creativity over the next 10, 20, 30 years. It's not that AI is leading the creativity or is the creator, but it's a third almost role person in creativity, effectively, in the production of that output that's then consumed and enjoyed.
What are some of the applications that we're seeing of that then?
Yeah, a few things that AI is really good at, particularly, so we're working games, immersive experiences, so that will be the focus of a lot of my comments. AI is great at joining the dots, at filling gaps, at translating vision or content into a slightly different form for the purpose of delivery in that particular experience. And what that gives us is the ability to handle more emergent scenarios, to give the player more freedom when they're enjoying an experience. But that's still, for us, driven by this kind of human authored backbone and spine. And so I think, fundamentally, one of the applications in games and in immersive is effectively filling the gaps to allow more emergence in those experiences.
From our perspective, we've done a couple of projects with Meaning Machine where we've studied audience responses to their games, which are, in this case, 2 murder mystery games where you can have free-form conversation with characters. You're trying to interrogate those characters, make sense of the world, find out who's done it, piece together the whole mystery. To me, it's a natural evolution, again, with the historical mindset of the murder mystery genre, where we've had kind of versions that you can ask more or less kind of guided questions and have more or less influence over the world. This allows you kind of ultimate freedom, arguably, but we were interested in what does that actually look like in practice? If you sit down with players and see them play in the moment, what does that mean? And we found that it does allow for certain types of role-play experiences that you couldn't get in other sort of modes and other genres. We were also really interested in the underlying technology, though. So for the Bristol Museums project we did quite recently, we took Meaning Machines technology, we worked with Bristol Museums and a research team within the university, and we built an experience for the Egyptian gallery, for those who may have been there. And what that entailed was a game on your phone where you're talking to the Egyptian gods, and they are giving you quests to explore and engage with around the gallery. So a game on your phone with quests, nothing new there. But the AI allowed for free-form conversation, so you can endlessly interrogate and inquire and actually engage in a kind of semi-research process yourself as you go through that space. You can inquire about the objects you're seeing. You can inquire about the mythology of that space. You can ask kind of questions that are just only going to sort of be raised by the fact that you're actually exploring this gallery in a kind of quite active and directed way. And we were doing this intervention because we would notice that when people go to the gallery, although it is quite a questy, quite dark, quite interesting space, they just sort of walk around quite passively. They don't really stop and linger. So we were interested in, can this change how people experience that kind of cultural heritage content in the moment? Again, we did a research study to show that, especially with groups of people, it really does work. It's like an escape room. So again, AI is not the creative partner. It's just a sort of engine almost that allows for those kinds of experiences to be designed, but it still requires humans to come up with the ideas.
It sounds like a really good event. Megan, I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, no, I was finding that really fascinating. I think it's interesting because doing technically very different work using AI, it's the exact same thing that I'm finding with our teams, is that AI can do some amazing stuff and it can make really dumb things seem smart, but it's really about the people using it. And that's where we get the real intelligence from it. When you're able to think critically about how you're prompting it, it's not just in the conversation, it's not just writing one prompt and going with it, but having that conversation, giving it the context, giving it the background. I know within our team, we use AI a lot and we develop agents and we're helping clients understand how to use their AI. So in that sense, I'm seeing it as if you kind of just go and have a quick conversation, write a report for me, it will do a good job, but it won't be context-based. It lacks that awareness. But when you're able to put in all that information, give it that context, correct it regularly, it comes out with something really unique and it can be a really great enabler. I see this a lot in conversation in business. We see automation potential. We can cut roles because of that. And I worry because what I'm really seeing is it can save us 6 hours in helping us with that creative process, but it's really hard to go to that same developer or to the same person writing a report or whatever it is and say, I can cut 6 hours of your day out. It's much easier to save somebody some time and amplify their effort rather than seeing it as a replacement in any way.
Yeah, if I can just pick up on the theme of sort of what are we actually using AI for? Anybody know Merriam-Webster's word of the year, 2025? Slop. The chief executive of YouTube said that their mission for 2026 was to reduce slop. I don't know about you, but I'm not seeing a reduction. I'm seeing it going the other way. So people are using the tools because they can. And I guess they think they're being creative when they put together some little YouTube video with the automated voice and the clips of stills of whatever the subject is. And it doesn't actually relate to what they're talking about. And it's all very, very amateurish. And then you've got to say, well, what's the reward function? Because that's why people are putting this together, because there's a reward function that is motivating them in that direction. The reward function is more likes, more eyeballs, more attention on whatever it is they're putting out there. And therefore, they are motivated to be what they would probably think of as being creative, but in a way that actually doesn't excite us. It doesn't appeal to us as humans. So that for me is the challenge. And again, thinking about the history point, when the printing press first came about, the first decades, it was all about the publisher, the printer, having the power. The printer got all the money, all the reward for whatever it was they put out there. And then it was the Statute of Anne in 1710. I'm looking at the historian here. Yeah, I'm getting a nod. 1710. That was the big change, which said, actually, we want to motivate people to create knowledge, which we will then have in the public domain. So that was what said the author retains the copyright for a certain period of time. After that, the knowledge is in the public domain for anybody to enjoy. So that was the really big change in power. The power dynamic, the reward function changed from saying if you write something, the publisher gets the benefit, to saying if you write something, you get some benefit out of it. So that was how we've lived ever since until now. And now we're saying, no, the reward function changes. It's how you get the attention on anything rather than saying it's quality. And that sort of disintermediation, taking quality publishers, people with experience, domain knowledge, expertise out of the equation is very democratizing, but also is pushing us towards incredible low quality. And that's a real frustration. How do we value anything if the good stuff is swamped by the bad stuff?
Yeah. I like that our mission is to reduce slop. And yeah, as you say, is it because it gets engagement, which makes YouTube money, which why would they want to stop that? I'll go over to Ben because I quite like to hear talking about maybe not necessarily slop, but specifically looking at the gaming industry. Is the gaming industry aware of the risks and challenges that AI poses? And I know you've already got the Meaning Machines point of view, but what you see across the industry, would you say that they know what's coming?
I think the games industry feels very resistant to AI generally, I would say. We're overloading the term AI all the time in this conversation, right? But if we talk about generative AI generating content for games or in games, for instance, as a starting point, yeah, the general trend over the last sort of 18 months, 24 months or so has obviously been the drop of ChatGPT and AI tools in everyone's hands and everyone exploring, at least becoming familiar with what they do. But equally, seeing the slot that's generated, and obviously the games industry is driven by, certainly in a large proportion, creatives wanting to put out enjoyable experiences that players want to spend time playing. And I think very quickly, you only have to look at sort of tech demos that came out over the last 18 months, 24 months or so, and you'll see plenty of slot, plenty of non-crafted, machine repeatable experiences that are badged some kind of AI, new novel AI experience. And that's not what the games industry really wants to put out in general, I would say. But I think the industry is certainly starting now to see more opportunities for AI, certainly in prototyping at scale, in testing lots of new ideas, in getting to maybe the sort of 80% mark with demos and that kind of thing to like prove out ideas, but then really handcrafting the end result, putting all the effort in a little bit later to deliver the experience. And just very quickly to reflect on some of the work that we've done with the University of Bristol, I think we are starting to see what AI can open up in terms of new possibilities in game experiences, in terms of, as I was saying earlier, like the freedom that it gives players, the agency that it can give players to sort of direct the story and be part of the journey that the game is taking them on.
Richard, I'd quite like to hear your perspective on that as well from the university point of view.
Sure. I can talk, I guess, from two particular angles. One is the player and the other is the industry. I think from the player side of things, we're actually seeing a kind of across the board significant dislike and indeed actually quite kind of aggressive dislike of generative AI content in games, especially when that content tried to be hidden effectively from players. And if you've got people who spend a lot of time, hundreds of hours in the game experience, and they expect it to be handcrafted by humans, and then they come across stuff that's been made by a machine, and that's probably meant that other people haven't had their jobs or lost their jobs or corners have been cut, then actually you get a really visceral reaction. And games have been review bombed for that very purpose. Anno 117 was released with AI imagery in its sort of loading screens. That was torn apart. AI voice acting elements in Clair Obscur, that was torn apart. There's lots of recent examples. But that's why we were really interested to actually sit down and go, where, if any, value does actually lie for the player. And I think we have been able to start to discern beneath the hype, beneath kind of where the industry is quite, I would argue, poorly applied these tools or applied them to cut costs. They basically made their own development processes more complicated because they're adding these things in, they're not getting the value at the end, they're having to then roll back things. So it's all a really big problem within the industry. But the players also don't want it. So you're getting this really, really complicated sort of twin issue there. Then from within the industry, as Ben alluded to, there's lots of experimentation about where you could actually get value in development processes, but then you have to actually do R&D within the company. So there are companies investing in that and taking the time, taking people off projects onto specific R&D projects to say, well, could we develop a system for our particular output that helps, that makes sense of this issue, that opens up opportunities here? And we are starting to see some of those things come through. We're also seeing a complete misunderstanding of what's actually being developed and put out there. So for those of you who may be familiar with, we're getting to see world models now. So this is models of like entire game worlds that you can just type a prompt with and get it. Normally it only lasts about a minute. This absolutely hit the stocks of Unity, one of the major game developers recently. But that makes no sense because the world models that are being produced are not going to replace Unity. They are not tools that can actually be used to make games. All they're doing is scraping huge amount of existing game data and replicating again, recompiling something that looks a bit like a game for a minute and costs hundreds and hundreds of pounds for you to access and to do this, for huge amounts of compute, and doesn't actually deliver a game or indeed a set of tools that developers can use. But it still hit the price of Unity, the stock of Unity, because investors didn't really understand what they were seeing. They thought, oh, this is now going to be the new future of game development. So again, I think it's misunderstanding, it's industry bad practice, malpractice, uncertainty around how to use these things. And then players are sort of starting to observe this and sort of critique it and have their own perspective on it. So I think, again, it's just cutting through that hype. It's taking time in businesses to understand where you could reasonably use these things, where you shouldn't, and then developing content that actually makes sense of these tools in the moment and that delivers value for players.
I find that quite interesting that there is this aversion by players to have AI in their games. But then on the other hand, we have all these consumers, as Sue said, who just churn out all this slop and quite happily think of it as creativity. But I'm not a gamer, but I get it. I would want something I know someone has carefully created, a world for me to explore or solve puzzles in or whatever it may be. I don't want just an AI that gives me something that is replicating something else that has come before. That's the cushy questions out of the way. I want to move on to governance, and I might start with you, Megan. Are corporations on top of this? Which I know is a big question, but maybe that can start us off.
Our corporations, our government's on top of this. Just one quick point. So interesting that you guys are saying that, because I think we're seeing that across all industries. You can take that exact lesson and place it to almost any business. And it's the same thing, finding out where AI is actually going to add value, not cut costs, and not destroy the user experience, whether it's a customer, whether it's a client, whether it's a gamer. That's a big piece. But going into the government, that's a huge bag of worms right now. And I think part of it that I want to say about that is that I was at an event not that long ago. It was data ethics and AI. And the one thing that surprised me was how much the conversation hasn't moved on in the last decade since we really kind of started getting to the big conversations around AI ethics. And that we still have a lot of questions out there about what it means to be ethical, even especially from a creative perspective. And what we're talking about here today, about who owns the work, how are we using it? And especially, and I'm sure coming from the gaming industry, you have a lot of user data. So how do we do that? And how do we treat data? Because we definitely come from an era where we collected data quite indiscriminately about people, even with GDPR rules. But we're coming into an era where I think we need to rethink that and think about how we collect data on people. And I hope at least that we will get pressured into a world where we don't just all kind of accept that we've lost privacy and just give up all our data rights and everybody's kind of creating profiles on us. I like the term data dignity and realizing that the data is connected to real people and that we need to be treating it as such. But the challenge is that we just have such different rules coming out of governments right now. And I think like one of the big one that I think we'll all get touched on is around copyright issues. We see a German low court that said an AI algorithm learning off of licensed work was no go. It wasn't cool. It was copyright. Where a UK High Court said it's not actually making a duplicate. It's not actually keeping it. It's only learning off of it. So it's not copyright. So we're seeing literally the exact opposite views on the same subject coming out of different countries. And then, of course, the UK and the US have taken different views. In the US, we have different states. So I think we are coming into that even more challenging era of using AI and need to be conscientious, not just of what we're doing, but where we're doing it, because different rules will apply, especially as EU AI regulations come about. I think we're going to create new pressures because there is some argument to reducing the regulations to encourage innovation, but there's also how do we do it safely in a world where this data represents us. It represents real people and a real world. And we do have a choice right now. Do we go down a path where AI becomes kind of like our overlords, but like in a world where AI is superior, where data is just, as I say, we give up our privacy, or do we go down a world where we say, no, we don't accept that. And we want to be in a world where we realize data is connected to real people, that we want to have real rules and regulations in place to help protect that as we go forward. So it is, as I say, it's a big bag of worms, and sorry to give you that type of consulting answer where it all depends, but it does depend a lot. I think we're at a point where we need to have these conversations and start thinking about where do we want to take this in the future and where do we want to be positioned, especially being a part of the conversations.
Yeah, I will get back on, I think, on the government question, but I want to hear from Sue as well, because you do work with companies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And really interesting when you think about exactly as Megan's saying there, the leaders of organizations, people in organizations are having to decide for themselves what the right thing to do is, because we're lacking this overarching sense of what the right thing is, whether that's by regulation or court cases or whatever. So we've got to make decisions for ourselves. Anybody want to guess what proportion of FTSE 350 companies have a published code of business ethics? Anybody think it's 90%? No.
I guess 2.
2%. Okay, that's easy to imagine. Somewhere in between. It's about 50% have got a code of business ethics, let alone a code of AI ethics. So that we've got this massive gap where leaders don't really know how they're going to frame this. And EY did a survey last year where it was enterprise level. So, big companies. They surveyed nearly 1,000 large companies. And they asked them, first of all, what tools they were using. And 75% of them were using generative AI in their businesses. Okay, you'd expect that. And then they asked them, what sort of governance have you got in place? Only a third of them actually had formal governance in place. And then they asked them to recognize how they should control and treat 5 different AI risks. Only 12% of them got all 5 answers correct. There's lack of government direction. There's a lack of knowledge amongst leaders of what they should do. So huge opportunity. Hey, University of Bristol, we can educate the next generation of leaders and really inspire them, as we do try to do. And I've been amazed at the quality of some of the activities going on in the university and the inspiration that people are getting on for that next generation of how they can use AI tools with wisdom and integrity. What does that really mean? How does that shape what the decisions they might make in the future? Which is great for the next generation of leaders. But what about the people who are actually making those decisions in organizations today? So they are adrift. And I did a session just yesterday in London with a very diverse group of leaders on this whole topic. What should they use AI for in their organizations? How do they frame those discussions? And we talked about responsible AI framework, and we talked about the 8 stages of good AI governance. And so there's real concrete things for them to do. But you could see them going, okay, I get it. I'm on the bus now, but how do I convince everybody else back at the ranch? And this is the problem, that we've got to convince people all the time to see that doing the right thing is in their best interests, rather than just saying, quick win, grab some money, run away, and don't care about the consequences.
Again, quite a few interesting things on there that I want to pick up on, and I'm also conscious that we've sort of used up half the time already. I want to quickly look at data, though, which Megan touched on. Are companies structuring data in the right way? Are they using data in the right way with AI today? Never mind, do they know what's coming in 5-10 years' time? Are they putting the right things in place?
That's a great question. I think when we look at leaders in the AI space, that's one of the key things they've done right, is to have the data in the right place. So that readiness is there. So when they're bringing AI in, it's not a massive leap, but it's where a lot of organizations are struggling and continue to struggle, because it's not the big sexy project of rolling out an AI. Fixing your data foundations for your organization isn't the coolest of tasks, unfortunately. We are getting into an era where we can use AI to help us with that process and make it a lot cheaper, faster, easier. But that's definitely a big gap that we see in the industry right now. So totally agree with you. Huge opportunity with AI governance and supporting organizations and leaders around that, and big opportunity in getting those data foundations right. And getting those data foundations also equals getting data ethics right. Because without the good foundations, you have things like spreadsheets running around the organization with no controls on it. And that can be dangerous with just data in a spreadsheet, let alone using AI. So I think that those two together need to progress. And that's where leading organizations are at.
Absolutely. So what I am seeing from talking to the people who are working on the next generation of AI tools, so they're out in San Francisco, they're in London, they're in Singapore, they're in China, they've drunk the Kool-Aid. They really are convinced that the next generation of AI tools that we won't see for perhaps 18 months or 2 years are going to be so powerful that it's going to blow our socks off, and we're all going to worship the machine or whatever. I don't know. But the one thing I would say to my clients is, if that's true, then we need to spend the next 2 years organizing our data better, getting it out of those silos, getting it out of people's heads, getting it out of the spreadsheet on my C drive, as opposed to, something that's more accessible. And we need to unpick our workflows, because we have horrible workflows in our organizations that we've created. And then we thought, well, this was a good way of doing something. Then someone else comes along, takes over the job and does it slightly differently. And it's very, very messy. If we can spend the next 2 years in training, if you like, getting our data organized, unpicking those horrible workflows, understanding what we're really trying to achieve, then if the next generation of AI tools come along and they are so much more powerful, we'll be ready to decide what we want to do with it, as opposed to where lots of leaders are at the moment, where they're just sitting back and saying, I really don't even know how to get started because I need to do that unsexy 2-year piece of work getting my data organized. So that's what I'd say to people. Think about this as being your training for the marathon. And then the marathon starts with the next generation of AI tools, not the ones we have today.
I've seen a lot of nodding from Richard and Ben. So
Just to pick one example of that in practice, when we did the Culture Quest experience with Bristol Museum, it was a really interesting test bed for them because it required them to work through all the data they had in the gallery to make sure the metadata was up to date, could be parsed by the systems that we were using. And that was essential to actually provide an experience that wasn't just talking to ChatGPT in a gallery, which you can do and is terrible because it will just generically provide anything. It will misunderstand context. It won't be able to hold memory, et cetera, at least right now. And I think we've seen an example of this talking about the sort of content with conscious where it hasn't worked. So there was a project, well, a hobby project called the Living Museum, where a technologist just scraped all of the data from the British Museum's website and then allowed you to just have a chat interface with all the objects. Sounds quite nice, sounds quite harmless. There was nothing in there beyond the object. So when you started having a conversation, it could take you off on any route. And I mean any route. So museums are really conscious about colonialism, about decolonizing their collections, about understanding repatriation, about thinking about where collections have come from, about human remains policies, all this sort of stuff is what we were working with Bristol Museums and putting into the system that we had. So that if players ask questions about these things, they would be able to be taken down a journey that actually makes sense of all these really significant ongoing challenges and debates in cultural heritage. Couldn't do that with the Living Museum. And so you got sort of wildly wrong, inaccurate, offensive, morally questionable, ethically problematic responses regularly. And it blew up online. You can go and read about the kind of furore that it generated. But again, it just shows that that consciousness bit is absolutely essential to the thing, and then having your data in place.
Just a couple of points to add. Organizing your data gets you better results. So it's worth the investment for sure. And I think we're talking about organizing data, but I think we should also be talking about protecting data. And we should be talking about valuing data. Understand what value you've got in your data. Understand what your opportunities are as a business or a creative studio or whatever. Protect your data, understand how it's being processed, what you're willing to give away to get a result, what you want to keep within your business because it represents your IP, etc. So they're the only three things I'd add.
important things though. And it's something that I've spoken to a few people over coffee just now. It's a lot of people just sort of put their data into AI and let AI do its thing and they don't really think about it kind of beyond that. So yeah, that's really important. Thanks, Ben. I wasn't aware of the example with the website that scraped the British Museum. How do we build trust in this system? Which again is kind of a big question, but I'll maybe ask Richard first because you touched on this with your... If you really don't want to, I can answer one of the others.
I mean, there is a whole research area around trust security and stuff that's going on at the moment. There's a lot of investment in projects in that space. It's not my area, so I'm going to caveat everything that's not the area I work in as an academic. From a kind of anecdotal project level thing, I can, I guess, talk to it. And I think that is, again, just sitting down with actual users, visitors, in this case, in the gallery, with that project, with players of Media Machines games, and deeply understanding their responses. And we've categorized responses in the research we've done here as like, what do people do when they engage with these systems? How do they think about what they're doing? What is their reasoning process? And then what do they feel? I know other people in this room have run projects that have kind of dug into the interesting things that happen when humans and machines co-create everything. But that's effectively what we're interested in. I think if you can map those responses across those different dimensions, then you get a really interesting picture of not just where things work, but I guess how trust in the system builds. Because when we were interviewing people after playing Media Machines games, even a year or two ago now, about a year ago, actually, exactly, there was really interesting questions where some people were saying, well, this could be really misappropriated or used in really problematic ways, or it could become like dating sims, or people get lost with these characters. And lo and behold, over the last year, what have we seen? Problematic dating sims come out. People very, very sadly committing suicide because AI chatbots told them to. So that's not how to build trust in the system, obviously. But I've also talked to lawyers working in this space, and they're saying, well, regulation alone can't save us. We can't regulate our way out of these things, especially now that the genie's out of the bottle. So is it about framing? Is it about continually telling people this is what you're engaging with? This is the kind of system. These are its limitations. These are the ways in which it's trying to get you to trust it and why you perhaps shouldn't. It's unlikely that those things are necessarily going to work because if people could just turn them off or they'll ignore them. So it actually gets to a really deep psychological issue, which is why there is a whole research area around trust and security and everything, because it's deeply socio-technical issue. It's about our relationship with technology, and that's very complex.
I see a lot of nodding from Megan.
It's a really tough one, and it's not a new issue either. It's something that's been going on for quite some time, and we are definitely in a hype cycle right now where, the SOP's coming out. We want to go fast. We want to break things, take people on the journey. It's not going to be perfect right away. That's also what breaks down the trust is if you're digging through the data that you've created for a project and all of a sudden you're seeing mistakes in there and it's been AI generated. Well, now we don't trust the algorithm because we see that one mistake. It hasn't been verified by a person. So we have to be very conscientious of that. And I think that's part of what's probably going to crash us out of this hype cycle. The last hype cycle, we were kind of crashed out of it because 2020 came along and all of a sudden our focus went from AI is really cool and it's coming and we're working with it to how do we respond to a global phenomenon and then crisis after that happening. And now we're back into that hype cycle and we're seeing it come out again. As you say, we're seeing the poor quality videos, which people are going to get fed up with and they're going to skip past. And then you're not going to want to be on that platform because all it is poor quality. And we saw that in the last one. In the last wave, one of the big ones, and was one of my favorite to watch, was when chatbots, everybody had to have a chatbot all of a sudden. It was about 2018, 2019. If you did not have a chatbot on your website, like how out of date are you? And they were just form-filling exercises. And I remember the one that irritated me the most on a site, when it would keep popping up and say, do you want to hear a joke? And I'd be like, yeah, sure, I want a joke. I'd be like, give me your email. And I was just like, I don't want to give you my email. And then so I close it down. And then a few minutes later, pop back up. You want to hear a joke? I'm like, yeah, I want to hear a joke. So we need to be ultra cautious because it could seem the greatest thing, especially when we're in these hype cycles. And if we don't deliver on it and people don't have that user experience that they want, as you say, they get lost in a dark corner and then they don't like the AI because all it does is keep me stuck in a dark corner and I don't know how to get out of it. People are going to get fed up and then that shine is going to wear off really quickly. So I think part of that building trust is understanding where we are and understanding if you want to make it through this cycle is that you have to build trust. And you do that through having accuracy, but also being aware of your limitations and recognizing it is a social technical issue. And some people are walking in very mistrusting to begin with. And other people are walking in going, let's go with it. So we have to realize that there's different reactions to it. I come from it from a business perspective where I'm looking at workers. And if they see mistakes in the work that's happening, they're not going to trust that system because their whole job is going to become watching the AI outputs. And it's just like, well, how much better of a job is that monitoring a computer over just doing the work yourself and knowing it's accurate the first time? And is it really saving us time? So I think that it's going to be a tricky area to navigate. And part of the building trust is having it working, not running so fast that we trip over ourselves in this space.
And I think trust it's a strange thing, isn't it? You think about how we can quickly move as a society and as individuals from not trusting to trusting or back again. Waymo, self-driving cars are coming to London this year, apparently. And there's an opportunity there for us all to jump in a self-driving car, have a go, see what it feels like. I tried it in San Francisco last summer, and it's a very strange experience when you first set off. But actually, you very quickly go, hang on a minute, I trust a human driver I've never met before to drive me safely. So, yeah, the machine seems to be doing okay. And you move incredibly quickly from fear, skepticism to trust and faith in the machine. And it was exemplified for me quite neatly because the day after my Waymo ride, I needed to take an Uber across San Francisco to go the other way. And the Uber driver turned up in the car with a crack all the way across the windscreen, whereas the Waymo was beautifully maintained. And when we were at a red stoplight, the Uber just started to creep forward and the driver jumped on the brakes and said, hey, I must have zoned out there. And I'm thinking, give me my Waymo back. That doesn't zone out. It's just not a thing. So, it's how quickly we build trust. And as a society, we kind of flip from one extreme to the other without necessarily going through these more rational processes. So there's opportunity and threat there. There's opportunity for businesses to take advantage of us, to take advantage of this nature that we have and push us in directions that we might not want to go. So we try to bring in regulations like in the EU AI Act. There's a requirement there for companies that are affected by the Act to give some AI literacy training to people. And that might be people who are internal in a company building a tool, sure, but it could also be the users of a tool. So you might previously be a non-exec director of an insurance company. And there we were talking about, okay, so if somebody wants to buy some insurance and we're using an AI model to decide what the level of premium is that we're going to charge them, do we need to tell them about that? And how would we tell them about that in a way that they can't just switch it off or just skip past it? Pretend I've seen that little video that takes 30 seconds. And if my competitor insurance companies don't do that, then I'm introducing friction into the system, which might mean I don't sell so much insurance and they sell more and I go out of business. So there's all these competitive pressures that are pushing people away from doing the right thing. So I don't have an answer. As you say, very complicated, socio-technical, so many different factors in it. But I hope that as humans, we will push and keep pushing ourselves to be skeptical. I love it when people are skeptical about technology and I love it when they're asking good questions. But it is very easy to get suckered in by how magical it all seems.
Yeah, I have so many questions that I think are important that we're not going to get to, but that's fine. But if we talk about trust, how do we instill trust in people that the AI is not going to replace them? Whether it is the, having to fix the mistakes that AI currently makes, or whether it is a case of, well, we're letting 20,000 people go because an AI can do the job, even if it can't.
So I'll bring the skeptic into the room, shall I? And
Yes,
then perhaps others will cheer us up a bit more. I think an awful lot of jobs will go. And if I am talking to a chief executive and they're saying, I'm going to tell my people that AI will only enhance their work and there will be no redundancies, I'm saying to them, really? How can you promise that? You haven't got enough foresight to know that's the truth. And don't promise things that you can't absolutely guarantee. I already see lots of jobs that are changing because of the way we can use AI today, let alone this next generation of AI tools. So I think we're in for a big shakeup, and that really worries me about the future for our young people. I mean, my kids are 21 and 24 now. If they were 11 and 14, I'd be really worried about what the future looked like for them. So that generation, I think, I find it's a real struggle because, yes, I see that there could be new jobs, new businesses, new things that we do that get created. But I worry we're going to have a decade gap, which might go on longer, where we just don't know how to react to the machines and how to create something new that actually involves humans. We'll do all sorts of things with the machines, but I think humans might get left on the shelf.
What's the consultant's view, Megan?
The consultant's view. So actually, I put together a paper around this not that long ago. And one of the lines I liked came from the end, and it said, only about 1% of jobs are truly fully automatable if we look at it, because we get a lot of confusion too when we talk about roles versus tasks being automatable. And, we can say a task is automatable and people will assume it's the role, vice versa. But in reality, all jobs will change. It's coming. And I think one of the big things that another paper I'm working on, because as I said, there's not that much interesting about me, it's looking at the behavioral change with AI. And I was kind of asked out of this paper, like, what is the one fundamental thing that a leader should take away from this and like that can help them with their organization? And it's really understanding what the AI is doing. And it's not saying that you need to go in and know exactly like, this is the data going in, this is how it has to be formatted, this is the specific types of analysis happening to the data, these are the algorithms that they're using, and this is what's coming out. It's understanding generally what it's doing, understanding kind of what the data that's going in, what's happening to that data, what is transforming it, what's coming out the other end, but really, what is that doing to work? Because normally what's on the label isn't what it's actually changing, is what we find a lot of the times. So like one example that I always lean back on, because it was one of my first big aha moments in business, was we were automating processes around onboarding. And when there was one person in the team that was just so resistant to it. And I was like sitting there, just like, why is this person just so resistant? We're making their job better. And I really thought about it. And it was a realization that at that particular organization, one of the things I really emphasized was relationships. Your first 6 months at the organization was all about building relationships. And that's what you really valued in the employees, was what relationships they had in the organization. The impact that we were doing wasn't making their job easier. Yes, it was. But it was also replacing those important relationships that that individual had built. So all the people that they needed to email, depending on what the hire was, that's what we were replacing, was those relationships for that individual. And once I was able to identify that, we were able to have a different conversation with them and say, your role is changing because you're not going to be emailing them, but you have to understand all the people who are involved in this process and now oversee it and oversee the automation. And if there's changes, understand how to change that automation. And when we were able to have that more realistic conversation with the individual, their resistance went down. But I think that's something that we really need to understand. It's not that it's going to automate this process. Like, okay, great, it's going to do that work for us. But what does that mean to us as individuals in an organization working with that technology? How is that going to affect our work and change that? And I think that that's a big piece that business leaders, even in gaming, when you're working with developers, what is it really doing for their work? Not just, it's going to help amplify your work or it's going to write code for you, but what does that really mean in that flow of work? And what does that mean? You see people who, and I have a developer who said to me, well, I have to get into consulting now because all my work for being a developer is going to go away. It's going to be automated. And so we've had conversations about that. And it's really thinking about, is that actually true? What is the impact going to be? And thinking about how is it going to change roles? Because we're definitely going to see a massive shift in the work we do. And I think that's going to be really important to be honest about.
I definitely don't have as fantastic an overview as both Sue and Megan do on this topic. I've got a world I'd not like to live in and a world I'd like to live in. So I can put that out there based on kind of what we've done with Mean Machine and the perspective that I have from that. And one thing that I've always taken away from is the fact that to build a good game that uses AI as an underpinning engine, it requires more creativity from a human. It requires more effort from the storytelling aspect. And the way I've often thought about it is, if you're engaging in any kind of storytelling, there's the iceberg metaphor that Hemingway gave us. So, you actually have to write this entire iceberg, but actually what the player will see or reader or the viewer or whatever will be just the tip of it. With an AI game, the AI can dip into any of it. So you actually have to write more of it. It has to be more robust, more complex, more detailed, more able to withstand stress testing from players who do wildly wacky things. And so there's more opportunity there for humans. It's actually increasing the kind of things we can do. Of course, then I see on the other hand, companies like Rockstar firing a bunch of people. I can see games companies using it in the worst possible way, using these tools poorly. So that's not the world I want to live in. I think there is a middle path which speaks much more towards what you were saying, Megan, which is that a sort of critical reevaluation of where the true value in what we do lies. And the way I've heard this is actually when there's a podcast about kind of AGI, artificial general intelligence, and I think it's often wildly overblown. And what this podcast was really helping doing was just grounding it as like, can a machine do kind of average level tasks that a human might be able to do? And if it can do those things, where does the value then lie? And the journalism was used as an example here. And he said, well, actually, probably all the value of a journalist's role lies in their network rather than necessarily some of the other bits. It's not me saying this is what was on the podcast, but I thought it was an interesting example because it positioned what is much, much harder to automate and where those relationships are essential. And I think if we can do that in a creative context, then actually we see there's so much that cannot be automated. And especially in the games development context where everything is really complex, interoperable, it's all about teams working together. It's about complex systems interacting together. These are things that are actually quite resistant to, I think, some of the way in which these tools are framed and work. So that's where I have hope.
Absolutely. Yeah, to echo a couple of points, really, I think creativity in the games and creative industries, immersive experiences, etc., I think it's going to change the way that people create experiences. But as we've spoken about with Slop, AI at the moment is not creative, really. It's not going to replace the art form of creativity in those industries. I think it is empowering people to do new things. And maybe to your point, Richard, you said, we observe that we have to put more content into these experiences we're creating. And one might think, well, why do I want to create them? If I've got to do more work, I'll just do this sort of handcrafted version. Well, what it gives is it gives the player more freedom. It gives them a new experience. We want to push the boundaries. That's what the games industry does do all the time. It innovates. It creates new experiences. It looks at its past, but creates a new future. And I think that's what's really exciting for creatives and the adoption of AI in the creative industries is what new can we do with it? How bigger can we go? For instance, at the moment, if we put a load of NPCs into a game, we give them all pre-written lines. They act out those lines based on logic, etc. Yeah, it seems semi-human, or maybe it doesn't need to seem human, and it's fine. But now we can direct 100 NPCs using AI to deliver more human-like dialogue that reflects what's going on in the game, etc. And the role of the creator, the author, the game director, the narrative director is still very much 100% there. It's just allowing us to do things at new scale. And I think that's what is exciting and is the opportunity, certainly for creatives with AI. Just a couple of comments on how we sort of build trust and how we empower people to do that. I think one is a sort of openness, sharing, upskilling people. People need to understand what's possible, what the considerations are as an education piece as well. Generative AI is moving so quickly. And I think an observation is studios are trying to grapple with how they can use this for good creative experiences, not just for automation or productivity boosts. And there's definitely an education piece on what is possible with AI and what's not possible. It's almost understanding what the limits are is part of your process to understanding what the benefits can be. A little bit of a ramble. But yeah, fundamentally, I think it's about empowering people to explore what new is possible rather than to immediately go in and think, oh, okay, how can we speed up or do something or automate something that we're already doing? Because in the creative space, it kind of sounds crazy.
No, I like that. And I think that's a good concluding word. And I like that there's a future for journalism as well as a journalist. The Next Leap is hosted and produced by me, Thierry Heles. Our composer is Alex White, our graphic designer is Jenna Clark, and the production supervisor is Roxy, the best dog in the world. Today's episode was a recording of a Foresight live event. Thank you to my friends at the University of Bristol for enabling me to bring that episode to you. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to share it with your colleagues. And if you feel so inclined, do post about it on social media. And if you do that, please tag me. I like seeing what you learned from episodes. If you want to reach out to me, you can send me an email at thierry@thenextleap.is. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. That's all for this week. We are going to stay with AI. Next time I'm talking to Patrick Speedy at InPart about how they are incorporating artificial intelligence into their matchmaking platform for tech transfer offices. Thank you very much for listening, or as we say back home in Luxembourg, merci, dass ihr gelauscht habt.